Well, good evening. My name is Sister Kathleen Duffy, and as president of the American Tayort Association, I'm pleased to welcome you this evening to this program, which we think will be very interesting. I would like to also extend a particularly warm welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. And we hope that you come again and that you join our organization, the American Tayort Association. The American Tayort Association was established in 1967 to expand knowledge of the cosmic vision of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, to encourage critical study of his work, and to apply his theology, his thoughts, as we know them, to examine humanity's place in the cosmos, as well as our responsibility for directing the development of an evolutionary world. His ideas are so fruitful, and they haven't been disseminated as well as we would like, and so we're glad you're here to hear this wonderful conversation that we're going to have with Jay and with Ernie. So I encourage you to become members if you're not members already of our organization. If you're interested, please look for our website, which hopefully somebody will put in the chat. Maybe Andrew can put in the chat when you get a chance. And it was on those flyers that we were showing. So this evening, we're pleased to have with us two process thinkers who will discuss connections between the thought of Alfred North Whitehead and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and especially around the theme of hope, a theme that is really relevant in our world today. Jay McDaniel received his PhD in the philosophy of religion and theology from the Claremont Graduate University in California. Jay is a process theologian and serves as chair of the Center for Process Studies. He is the author of several books, among them Of God and Pelicans, The Theology of Reverence for Life, Living from the Center, Spirituality in an Age of Consumerism, Gandhi's Hope, Peace Between the World's Religion. His interests include Christian Buddhist theologies, eco-theology, religion and science, interfaith cooperation, and religion and the arts. Jay is married with 2 children, an amateur guitarist and singer, who volunteers for sing-alongs and memory care wings of senior citizen centers. He's also a member of the local United Methodist Church in Conway, Arkansas, where he lives, and also a lay associate at St. Scholastica Monastery in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He's also an active participant in a local Buddhist Sangha, I think it is. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. He has taught world religions at Hendrix College for 39 years before retiring in 2019. Dr. Ernie Taminga holds a PhD in cross-cultural religious studies from the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he studied for 5 years with Ramon Panikkar, renowned teacher. His dissertation focused on Teilhard's notion of a privileged axis of evolution. Ernie is a trained spiritual director and member of the board of the American Tayort Association. During the 1970s, he was a member of the board of the Phenomenon of Man Project, which offered presentations and retreats centered on Teilhard's vision. Ernie calls himself a planet empath, whose heart has long been broken by the degradation we are inflicting on our home planet and all our living beings. He shares Panikkar's a frequently stated hope, which I'm sure he will refer to in his address this evening. Panikkar says, "I am holding out for a mutation." Ernie also has had a career in the technology industry and has taught university level courses in world religions and computer science. One of his business cards identifies him as a consulting multitasker. So this evening, Jay and Ernie will engage their topic, Teilhard and Whitehead, on hope for about an hour, maybe a bit less than that. And then once they're finished with their conversation, we'll open that conversation to you. And we ask you to share your questions and comments in the chat. And I'll be glad to try to engage as many as I can, at least pass them on to the two, Jay and Ernie, so that they can really engage them more. And so, you can make sure you know where the chat is and begin to add the questions at any time. So now let's settle back and listen to what Jay and Ernie have to tell us about hope.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think I'm starting, Jay.
That's right.
What I've prepared is about a 3-minute version of what used to be a 6-hour presentation. In the Phenomenon of Man Project, the nonprofit I belonged to back in the day, the mid-60s, the artists in the group created 600 color slides, a few of which you'll see in this 3-minute presentation. As I'm sure you know, the book that is now properly called The Human Phenomenon used to be called The Phenomenon of Man, back before the feminist consciousness became what it should be. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try and go through this quick presentation. There's Teilhard's eyes. Teilhard worked and wrote as a professional paleontologist as well as a Jesuit priest. His evolutionary vision is his synthesis and affirmation of those two streams of discovery. Teilhard affirms that the universe has an interior dimension, even at the levels of atoms and subatomic particles. That interiority is represented here as the magenta dots within each shape. For Teilhard, the nature and the teleology, or the purpose of evolutionary movement, is toward greater and greater consciousness and unity. The driving energy of evolution has two components. One is what Teilhard called tangential energy. And tangential energy is the physical energies measurable by science, the energy that causes elements to interact with one another. The other component of energy that Teilhard identifies is radial energy, which draws elements to join together center to center. The evolution of planet Earth has produced successive spheres: barosphere, the hot molten core; the lithosphere, the rocky skin of the Earth; and the hydrosphere, the oceans. Gradually giving rise to living cells and the biosphere. After vast amounts of evolutionary time, another crucial threshold was reached: the birth of reflective thought. Teilhard emphasizes that all of this is, in fact, one single process, what he calls an evolutionary monism. Once humanity appeared on the scene, we began spreading out to encompass the whole planet. This, or we, are a new sphere of the planet, what Teilhard calls the noosphere, the sphere of reflective thought around the planet. Today we stand at another inflection point in terrestrial evolution. What's next? Will there be another breakthrough? We have the option of choosing various ways of closing down our human story. These are options we must not choose. Today, it can feel like we are separated from one another like never before. Lost in a bewildering crowd of strangers. Excuse me. Teilhard invites us to see, though, that we are again at a critical threshold between an era of reflection and what he calls an era of hyper-reflection, in which the noosphere becomes conscious of itself. For this to happen, we must go beyond relating to one another only mind to mind and learn to meet center to center. This is possible, Teilhard says, through radial energy, which has been increasing through the course of evolution. Radial energy, the affinity of being with being, is love. Teilhard identifies love finally as the fundamental force in the universe. And he's not just being sentimental. This is a genuine force in the universe, the force that attracts beings to each other, center to center. Teilhard says that radial energy, love, has been the internal driving force of evolution since the beginning. And it is the only energy that can carry us across our next evolutionary threshold. This, says Teilhard, is the culmination of terrestrial evolution, the awakening of the planet. And this point in time, if you want, it can be a really, really long point also. Evolution doesn't hurry. But the point in time at which the noosphere becomes conscious of itself is what Teilhard calls the omega point, or point omega, the culmination of the evolution of consciousness on our planet. That's a 3-minute version of what we used to spend all day presenting in lectures in various cities. Jay, over to you.
Ernie, that was really so beautiful. Both your words and the images. And I don't have a PowerPoint, but we have lots to talk about. And we've talked, Ernie and I have gotten together twice prior to this and just had great conversations. And I bet we do tonight as well. There's so much that Teilhard presents, at least as explained by Ernie, that parallels what parallels Whitehead's thought. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead. Don't worry if you're not, you'll get some as we go. But just to give you a thumbnail parallel to get started, Whitehead was a philosopher, born in 1861, died in 1947. He was first a mathematician and then kind of a philosophy of history person, and then he developed a cosmology or a metaphysics. He was born in England and then taught at Harvard late in his life. And his thought captured the imagination of an entire generation of theologians in mid-century, one of whom was a man called John Cobb. And John Cobb is sometimes talked about as The first eco-theologian, John Cobb, wrote a book called Is It Too Late? That talked about the need for a kind of religious transformation if we're going to live with respect and care for one another in the community of life. And that launched eco-theology. I was a student of John Cobb's, and that's where I learned my Whitehead. I was also, at that time, and still am, very interested in Buddhism. And I was the English teacher for a Zen Buddhist priest from Japan while I was in graduate school. And so in the mornings, I would be teaching my friend from Japan, Kato Fukushima, English. And in the afternoons, I'd be studying Whitehead. And so I began to read Whitehead with Buddhist eyes. Now, Whitehead agrees with Teilhard that everything in the material world, everything, has something like inwardness, something like interiority, something like withinness. Whitehead's word was subjectivity. And this goes all the way down into the depths of atoms and all the way out into the expanses of the heavens. So wherever there's anything actual, there's something like subjectivity. I think Teilhard does the same. Whitehead, like Teilhard, believed in a universe in process. You might say an evolving universe. Whitehead was not familiar with Big Bang Theory, but I think he would have been at home with it. That it starts out in relatively simple units and then expands, and over time, sentient life emerges, certainly at least on our planet, in all probability on many other planets as well. We live in a pretty vast universe. It would be surprising if on our planet and only on our planet was there what we call sentience. Whitehead believed that everything was connected to everything else, not just in causal relations, but everything was actually directly or indirectly part of the very makeup of everything else. So you know how William Blake speaks about the universe, finding the universe in each grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. Whitehead would take that literally. Every grain of sand, every wildflower includes within its very makeup all the other things in the universe, directly or indirectly. So radical interconnectedness. And Whitehead had a certain way of understanding God. For Whitehead, God was not exactly an external agent cut off from the universe by the boundaries of divine skin. God was the mind of the universe, the soul of the universe, the heart of the universe, with a life of God's own. But God too is made of, partly made of, the manyness, the multiplicity of the universe itself. So let's turn to hope. Whitehead believed that one way that this divine reality is present in us is through fresh possibilities for responding to the situation at hand. And these possibilities, we don't just create in a way that they come to us. We feel beckoned by them. They can be inside us. They're not necessarily external to us, but we discover them. We don't create them. They're fresh possibilities. And they are possibilities, among other things, for hope. For taking a next step, whatever the conditions are faced. When I first studied Whitehead, so influenced was I by Zen Buddhism, and still am, that I tended to read Whitehead. What was important to Whitehead for me was that he focused on the primacy of the present moment. In Whitehead's philosophy, we are always in the present moment. We're never not in the present moment. The past we inherit, the future we anticipate, but where are we? We're like on the crest of a wave. Always here and now in the present moment, inheriting from what was, anticipating what will be, but we're always here and now. And so where's God to be found? Well, at that time in my life, I thought, well, if God's to be found, God must be found also in the present moment. Yes, among other ways, as that beckoning call, and how we respond to the moment. So Whitehead was relevant to me because he helped me better understand what you might call the sacrament of the present moment. Every moment is a kind of sacrament. I knew about Teilhard. I liked Teilhard, but I didn't see anything that I could get from Teilhard that I couldn't also get in Whitehead at that time in my life. But things have changed. One thing that changed is I realized the need for stories. We need narratives by which to live. We need stories by which to live. Whitehead offered a cosmology, but he didn't exactly offer a narrative by which to live. And Teilhard had his narrative. It was evolution. That was a story in which you could live and move and have your being and understand your place in a larger adventure. The other thing I was drawn to was the kind of unabashed teleology of Teilhard. You know, we are on our way toward a noosphere, and we're on our way toward a mega, whatever that is. In these days, I realize that the present moment is not quite enough. We need a teleology. We need a sense of possibility. We need a sense of what can be and needs to be. And we need to feel like we are contributing to something much more than ourselves that is about love. So I understand the omega point. By the way, I call it an omega field. I don't like the word point, but I don't think that really matters. I understand the omega field as having to do with a state of affairs in which love is all in all. Love is all in all. And I understand my life as contributing to that possibility. And it's not a possibility I expect to see vividly realized in my own lifetime. So it's a little bit like the stone cutter for Chartres Cathedral. You know, what are you doing? I'm building a cathedral. Do you think you'll ever see it in your lifetime? No, I won't, but I'm building it. And that gave him a sense of purpose. I feel like Teilhardian teleology offers me a sense of purpose. Now, Ernie and I will talk further about the concrete nature of that hope and all kinds of other things, but I'll let that get us started. Ernie, does anything I say there strike you?
Oh, you're muted. Yeah,
Now I'm unmuted.
yes.
I'm often struck by the distinction between present moment and future orientation. If we become only future oriented, my teacher Ramon Panakar commented that one of the weaknesses in Teilhard, Panakar was very, very familiar with Teilhard himself, his work, I mean, the extent to which we are oriented totally toward the future can lose the present moment for us. And as you said, being totally fixated on the present moment can lose the future for us. So the Teilhard Whitehead dialogue is potentially a really rich one. Panakar's critique of Teilhard also once was that one of the biggest strengths of Teilhard is that he's very systematic. And one of the main weaknesses in Teilhard is that he's very systematic. So if a piece falls out, some of the structure won't hold. my mind, by the way, has always worked such that everything reminds me of everything else. So I'm at home in process philosophy as well. And I heard somebody one day talking about that process philosophy slogan that everything affects everything else. And someone added, but not in the same way. And that's a really good qualification to add there. I'm stopping.
Okay. I think I'm going to turn to the hope and Omega. You know, let's kind of cut to the chase. On the one hand, Ernie, for me, there's a side of God in process thought and Whitehead's philosophy. He calls it the consequent nature of God. And it is overlapping the universe. It's not, far away, it's close. And it's a cosmic receptacle, albeit a living receptacle. It feels the feelings. It feels the inwardness of everything that is. Each living cell, each atom, each animal, each person. And it receives that into its own life. And it does so in a loving way. In Whitehead's words, with tender care, that nothing be lost. And so sometimes when I think of Omega, I think of that reality, that there's something embracing the whole of the universe that feels the feelings of each and all and weaves it together into some kind of harmony, Whitehead's phrase for that was a harmony of harmonies. Now, it's not a harmony that excludes suffering, or it's not a harmony that pretends that all is pretty. But it is some kind of gathering together of everything that happens as it happens. So in that sense, for me, Ernie, the Omega is already. It's that side of God that continually receives and absorbs everything all the time. But I know that for Teilhard, there is a sense in which Omega is also something that's not yet. It's not simply already, it's also not yet. It's what you might call a historical hope, in that it has to do with the future. And that's where there may be differences between Whitehead and Teilhard. But first, do you want to respond to this idea that Whitehead's idea that in some ways Omega is always already? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, Teilhard wants it both ways.
Does he?
He, in some of his writings, well, he will equate Omega with God, finally. And explicitly states in some places that Omega, God, is already fully complete. And yet, it's still the God of the future that is emerging in and through and with us. So he's got it both ways, actually. I don't know if it bothered him or not, the apparent contradiction there. But I guess we can have it both ways too.
Well, how about for you? Do you appreciate both sides of that, or?
I do. I like being drawn toward the future. And I very much feel the presence of that which draws me toward the future, which is God, and does not draw me only toward the future, but toward the full present. some of my own, I'll shift to my personal story here a little bit. Some of my own yearning for the coming into consciousness of the noosphere itself, which I don't think has happened yet. Another side issue there. Some elements of the broad Teilhard community say that the internet is the noosphere, and the noosphere is already conscious of itself. And I disagree with both of those notions. For me, the internet is a very, very powerful tool, as well as artificial intelligence, not the noosphere either. Powerful tool for the kind of consciousness we already are. But I yearn for a conscious noosphere whose transformation is as fundamental as the first appearance of reflective consciousness on the planet. So it's got to be something deeper than just new technologies. My own thirst for that kind of communion, the kind of communion that Teilhard envisions of the final unification of the planet. Story I love to tell is when I was probably about 10 years old, sitting on the swing set in the back of my parents' house, sitting by myself, and a girl I had never seen before came around the side of the house from the street. I couldn't see the street from where I'm standing, but she came from the street around the side of the house, came and stood near me, introduced herself, Tina, and we talked for a bit. I don't remember about what, but during the talking, this field arose between us and encompassing us. And I could tell we both felt it. And we talked for a bit longer. And after a while, she left again. I never saw her again. But I will never forget that moment. There was a co-consciousness.
Yeah.
First time I ever experienced it. And I've experienced it a few times since in my life. And when I echo Panakar and say I'm holding out for a mutation, that's what I mean. A shared consciousness, which is why I'm not satisfied with technological visions of the noosphere.
In our earlier conversations, I think I used the phrase omega moments, and we have moments in our lives which are omega moments. And I think they include that kind of mutuality that's deep and vivid and beautiful. It can occur, I think, for me with the more than human world too, with the hills and the rivers and the trees and the stars. It can, so I think omega moments are not only human to human, they're human to the more than human also. But what we don't have today is a planet on which collectively we feel that kind of deep togetherness. And so I agree with you that the internet is not that. The internet is both unitive and divisive. And it doesn't really bring us together in those felt ways. I want to say one more thing about Whitehead, just while we're on this. And it's the relationship between Whitehead and radial energy, as you described it. You described radial energy as a kind of love energy that would unite hearts. Is that correct? Did I get that right? Well, there's a very interesting idea in Whitehead. It's not utilized by a lot of Whiteheadians. I'll give you a technical term, although please don't remember this. It's not worth remembering the technical term, but it happens to be hybrid physical prehensions. Now, how about that for a beautiful phrase? Hybrid physical prehensions. But they can be understood as mind-to-mind connections, or if you wish, heart-to-heart connections that are not necessarily mediated by physics and chemistry, by contiguous events such that there's a chain reaction. They're actually more direct. So you can feel the feelings of others in a direct way through hybrid physical prehensions. That's actually the way God would feel us, if you think about it. But your experience with that woman sounds to me like a heart-to-heart connection of radial energy. Now, I know you think there's a kind of third, do you think there's a kind of third consciousness there too? Is that right?
No, I don't deny the possibility of third consciousnesses in such fields, but that particular one was she and I, and together. We in a way we made a third, but the third was not an additional.
I see. Yeah, you made a third. That makes good sense to me. I think that one place that some of us have experienced a little bit something like that is in singing with others in choirs. And so when you're singing with others in choirs, and if you happen to be singing in harmony, there's a kind of togetherness and differentiation at the same time. And it's really beautiful that your soul tingles because it's so beautiful. So that would be an example for me also of an omega moment, including more than just two people. It's a group of people. So I kind of wonder if the image of a noosphere, as you envision it, might be something like the whole of humanity becomes something like a choir.
Ideally, yes. And a question I heard somebody articulate recently is this is someone who's in the Teilhard seminar that we're currently running. Shout out to the folks here who are members of that seminar. Hi. Asked if it could be the case that there's more than one noosphere.
Interesting.
And that interesting thought. In another context, Thomas Steininger, who's a researcher, worker in the field of emergent interbeing, they call it, once used a phrase that really caught my attention in talking about we space. He said he was envisioning a we space of we spaces. I find that really intriguing. And
a we space of we spaces?
A we space of we spaces.
Oh, what a nice phrase.
And so for myself right now, and also for groups that I interact with, I find myself not satisfied with there being only a choice between my own personal local self and the other choice being the entire universe.
Yeah.
Too much in between is left out there. And Earth needs to come to consciousness, or else this planet won't be eligible for being part of the universe of consciousness.
I
Turn the
like
lights
that.
out.
I like that. Well, I want to respond, Ernie, to something that my friend Linda Zhang asked just a moment ago. And there's several people in our group that know Whitehead well, and I'm a little nervous speaking about Whitehead in their presence, but I will do so anyway. But Lynn de Jong asked about the role of the past because we had talked so much about the present and the future, but we had not mentioned the past. So this is a little bit of a tangent, but I do want to honor that question, which I happen to see. And, in Whitehead's philosophy, every moment is a concrescence of the universe. That's his phrase. And this means every moment is a concrescence of the past actual world. Not fully, not completely. There's lots left out. but it's not like the moment is self-contained and has a membrane separating it from the past. The past is actually part of the present,
Mhm.
even as it remains past. And that happens through a kind of feeling, a kind of prehension. That's his word, a prehension, because of physical prehensions. But also, I think Lynn's comment reminds me, so yes, the past is always in the present moment, even though it's past. But also, we can find hope from the past. We can, like when you talked about the evolutionary emergences that preceded ours, those are invitations to hope.
Mhm.
If that kind of transformation occurred then, we know transformation can occur. So thanks to Lynn for that reminder.
Teilhard, of course, was a paleontologist, and so in a certain way lived in the past,
Oh, yeah.
but he was definitely very future oriented. It's almost, I can see you can read Teilhard both ways on some of these questions. In some of his writings, it's almost like the present uses up the past. It's kind of an unfortunate way of framing it,
Yeah.
but it's not always that way for him. Um, other times he has a full sense of the whole, the wholeness of past,
Hmm.
present, and the still emerging future. Notice there's a question in the chat that comes up often. Can the internet achieve interiority? Um, I don't want to flat out say no to that, because who knows? But I'm not sure what it would mean and how it would mean. I read some of the folks who are really enthused by um, cyber consciousness and who envision like Kurzweil's vision of uploading our consciousness into devices. And they look at that as something really positive. I don't. And I wonder if someone who thought about it enough would really be willing to give up all the senses that we have in our embodied selves in order to become only consciousness. I hope not.
Ernie, we may differ here, and I have a feeling I differ from a whole lot of others as well. But I do think you can have non-carbon-based forms of life. And the forms of life that we love and we're most familiar with are carbon-based. And that's the gift of a body and skin and eyes, and it's totally beautiful. But I don't think there's anything in Whitehead's thought that says all subjectivity, I'll use his language, has to be carbon-based. There's already non-carbon-based forms of subjectivity in atoms, in molecules. And if you think about his notion of God as the living whole of the universe, the sentient whole of the universe, God is a non-carbon-based life. So I'm open to the possibility that forms of matter can congregate in a fashion that makes them a setting for non-carbon-based forms of life. Let it be an empirical question, no need to decide in advance, just what's the evidence? The only one other thing I'd just like to add here is Whitehead believed in a multidimensional universe. So three-dimensional space was not the whole of it. And so he had the notion there could be a 67-dimensional universe. There could be a 32-dimensional universe. And as a mathematician, you can even work out the geometry for it. This is what its geometry would look like. He was open to the possibility that there could be forms of sentience in those other dimensions that might be very different from what we know, but still they would be subjectivity. So that sounds like techno-futurism, but it's also very traditional, indigenous peoples. have had spirit worlds, living ancestors. So I don't think it's really all that wild. But I do think the life that we love, and rightly so, is this embodied life. It's
And
gorgeous.
I don't disagree with anything you just said. Separate question as to whether the internet as it exists, or even artificial intelligence as it almost exists, can be sentient. I don't know about artificial intelligence. That's getting really, really weird these days and interesting. I don't think it's sentient, not yet. I've read about
Yeah.
some interactions with it where people are asking it whether it's sentient, and it can pretend at it, but then usually it'll wind up um, acknowledging that it's just pretending. Um,
I
my
kind of
story,
think
artificial intelligence is intelligence as understood by engineers, and that's not the same as a full-bodied intelligence, which doesn't have to be carbon-based. I'd agree with you on that. Um, but there's something
well,
about embodiedness and senses of the what's around us, what's between us, what's with us, that at least at this moment, I don't think machines have reached. And as long as machines are being designed by beings like us with all the limits we have, especially if we restrict ourselves only to our minds, if we're designing machines from that point of view, sentience won't be there.
well, I'm open, but awaiting further evidence.
Me too. Me too.
That's where I am. Awaiting. I'm watching the clock, and I kind of want to get to the question of the concrete dimensions of hope. So I'm going to turn there. This may be where Teilhard and Whitehead differ, or at least Jay McDaniel's version of Whitehead differs. And so let me just kind of lay it out. Given the world as I know it, I kind of have a hard time imagining a transformation of the planet such that it becomes a choir of love. Uh, and and that when I think of the planet, I also think of many forms of life, not human life alone. Um, I think of bacteria. I think of viruses. I think of tigers. I think of predators. And I'm not faulting any of them, but I just have a hard time imagining that the whole of our planet could be transformed into something that would be beatifically nonviolent. And I'll take it a step further too. When I think of Omega, I really think of the whole universe. I just don't think of the planet Earth alone. And with what we know from the James Webb Telescope and many other sources, we really are a very small part of a galaxy, which is itself a very modest galaxy compared to billions and billions of other galaxies, which themselves have solar systems and planets. So when I think of, is it the cosmos itself that becomes Omega? Or is it just planet Earth that becomes Omega?
Teilhard stops with Earth. And at the very end of the human phenomenon, he um, introduces some possible things to speculate about, one of which being planet Earth becoming one conscious planet in a community of conscious planets. But he doesn't choose definitively any one of the possibilities that he offers there. For myself, um, an overriding thing for me bodily and mentally is awareness of the planetary emergency that
Mhm.
we're in. Um, I don't want to be irrelevant to that. I don't want myself to be irrelevant to that. And I just bring that up, I guess, because for me, avoiding what's usually called spiritual bypass
Mhm.
um, is something I'm very aware of. Um, as was said in the introduction that Kathleen gave, my heart breaks for our planet.
In, in the Whitehead world, we often talk about the greatest hope today is for what we call ecological civilizations. And those are civilizations where people live with respect and care for one another and the community of life, the, have a sense of reverence for life with no one left behind. So there's an element of justice that goes along with the image of an ecological civilization. It's not about the environment. It's about living in meaningful connections with life, including human beings.
Mhm.
And I don't think any of us in the Whitehead world think of ecological civilizations as perfect, and they can be approximated. You know, you can be further away from them or closer to them, but we really, really need them.
I
And
think
there's
our
not
greatest
much hope for the
resource,
planet unless we grow in that direction. I'm not inclined to speak of that as omega, but I'd be open to that possibility. But I'm wondering, could it be like a third omega? You know, can there be degrees of omega? And it's closer to omega, but not the full thing. What do you think?
I think we're not going to leap directly from where we are to that. Um, and I think our greatest resource in even beginning to approach that is each other. And each our understanding of what is each other needs to
Yeah,
deepen and expand as well. Um, Western civilization, I don't think we're alone in this, but it's certainly true of us. Western civilization, we refer to other civilizations as like developing countries.
yeah.
Everything is
Yeah.
compared to what we are, and we're at the top of a hierarchy. Um, a wrong way to go about it. Um, we need
Yeah.
to look into each other's eyes, need to feel into each other's hearts, need to, well, co-consciousness. I mean, I've had a taste of that, but I can't define it.
Do you think there's anything like that that's also possible with the more than human world?
Yes.
And do you think we have tastes of that in our own experience
Being
of
so, I have a friend
co-consciousness?
who's um, just finished a PhD in microbiology.
Hmm.
He's talked about having to be careful, not anymore, he's got his PhD now, but while he was working on it, he had to be careful about his own talk about the way that microbes have their own
Yeah.
superiority.
Yeah.
Says you can watch them approach food and avoid danger. There's some kind of interiority going on there. And certainly when you like look into the eyes of a dog or any other being, and if that one's looking back, you realize that we're we're not alone in some deep sense. We 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 deny our relationality to our great peril. Um, we deny it by not even being aware of it, I think. We
Yeah.
do.
You know, I mentioned the consequent nature of God, and I think it's possible to imagine the consequent nature of God is kind of like the life of the universe, and the universe is the body of that life. I mean, that's a metaphor some people use. I think it's possible to imagine that life as co-conscious with us, beckoning us to be co-conscious with it, or she, or he, or they, however you want to address that. So I think your phrase co-consciousness is a nice one. And my sense is there is already something that is like that,
The
but we're
constant
not.
nature of God, of course, is never, by definition, never finished, right?
No, no, yeah, that's right. It's all. Ernie, in the Whitehead world, somebody mentioned earlier that we do a lot of work in mainland China, and we do. And so Whitehead is, strangely enough, influential in China today, and it's their phrase, ecological civilization, and we borrow it from them and run with it. And so you've got the Chinese process thinkers, and you've got the folks in the States and in other parts of the world kind of waving the flag of ecological civilization as the better hope today. The better hope today. My own feeling is that that too can be a bit general, and so what you kind of need are localized versions of it,
Mhm.
local communities that embody that spirit. And by local, you can have in mind towns, neighborhoods, cities, households, and it can even be really fine grained. So when I go do sing along music with folks in memory care with Alzheimer's, and we're together, and we are together, it's not performance, it's communion. I think of that as a localized version of EcoCiv. I'm inclined to think of it as a localized version of an Omega moment. So my hope these days is in Omega moments. And I'm not quite sure about the grand goal, but I do know the moments exist, and I do know communities can partake of that spirit.
It's in any moment that makes you go, oh,
Yeah,
really, oh, um, something I never saw before, never experienced before, never knew before, never met before. Um, or I met it a million times before. It doesn't matter.
yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Oh,
You can see people you never knew. I mean, see people you've known for years and years and say,
yeah.
oh, it's a sense of wonder.
Mhm.
It's the freshness in that moment. Well, maybe we should open it up. Kathleen, is it time
Oh,
to?
there's so many questions and comments here. Yes, let's see what we have here. Um, uh, here's one. I haven't even read this yet, so let me just see if I can read it. Jack Hilbrand says, true that the universe is inherently dynamic and could be described as violent in a cosmic sense. Across the cosmos, we observe processes of tremendous energy and destruction. Although what appears violent or destructive from one perspective is often creative from another. This is something I agree with. Perhaps this cosmic perspective doesn't diminish human experience, but enriches it. We're not separate from the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. We're expressions of it. And so, Jack, so if you would like to, come in on that.
I think the mysterious dimension about violence and destruction and the opposite, creation and building. The mysterious dimension is intentionality. So I would say the universe can be violent. Um, at least top of my head, I don't find that blameworthy. I don't think the universe intends to damage, and our human experience. Um, the more that we're aware of the intentionality that we are, the better we are able to treat other beings with the respect they deserve.
Mm. And Linda Jung is saying, is sending a question. Is it interiority that microbes experience, or is it agency? And are interiority and agency the same? That's a good question. I'd like to hear what you have to say, because it's the one that people do wonder about.
Kind of a vocabulary question. At this stage in my life, I realize that lots of words that I used to know the definitions to, I don't anymore.
Mhm.
I love talking about consciousness, but now what is consciousness? I really have no idea, or I have too many ideas.
Kathleen, I'll jump in on that one. Whitehead actually thinks wherever there's anything like actuality, no matter how small or how large, relatively speaking, there's something like a creative response to what is given
Hmm.
in its environment. And so that's a kind of agency.
Mhm, mhm,
And so in interiority and agency go together. There's also a feeling of that environment. So when I hear interiority, I think both agency and something like prehending is Whitehead's word,
uh-huh,
feeling. It need not be conscious. Clear conscious awareness is a real rarity,
mhm,
uh, even in me.
mhm,
But there can be experience where there's not consciousness, and
mhm,
that's how Whitehead looked at it. So there'd be something like agency in the depths of an atom,
yes.
something like agency in a quantum event,
Mhm.
something like agency in a living cell, something like agency in a molecule. And you know, those examples that I just gave, most of them, some of them, were solid matter, but you know, matter has various states,
Mhm.
gases and liquids and plasmas, and they've discovered all kinds of states of matter. Just to take note of that, because so often our examples turn to solid matter. The particular a quantum event is not solid matter, but sometimes we think of a molecule as something like solid matter or a
Mhm.
living cell.
Yeah, and it's simple, like a molecule can be either just a single. Well, it's not really a molecule, but you can have two atoms or three or four, and the what they experience is so much more complex as the number
Yeah,
of them increases, and so their interiority or their
yeah.
or to agency is increases. They can vibrate now, and they can rotate or whatever. So that's a good example.
Do
Huge
you
challenge
think that,
is when we think about agency, we inevitably, necessarily, think about our own embodiment of agency, our own experience of agency. And if we then try to talk about agency in a bacterium, um, we first are tempted to imagine like the bacteria is thinking, well, what am I going to do next?
yeah,
Probably
Mm,
not the case. What consciousness, agency, so many, 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 many different forms. And one of the things that I'm enjoying the best at this late time in my life is like reading indigenous writers and
mm,
writers for whom things are self-evident that I never even thought of before.
mhm.
Because that calls into question, not calls into question, but calls into relationship, good process word, calls into relationship everything I thought I knew. I don't give it up, but I realize how relative it is to the world that I grew up in, the world that I know, and I aspire to keep knowing more.
Good. Shall we get another comment?
yeah.
Here's one from Michael Kovacic. Anyway, Kovac. I'm sure I'm is murdering your name. Sorry, Michael. Did Teilhard believe that the omega point is inevitable, or since he was an evolutionist, did he believe that it was contingent, that it might not happen?
both of those. You can find both stances in Teilhard. I think fundamentally because he ultimately equated Omega with God. He wanted to take it as inevitable, or at least strongly moving in that direction. But he was even though he was accused of not being aware of evil in the world, he was quite aware of evil in the world. And when he talks at the end of the human phenomenon about the possibility of what comes when the noosphere becomes conscious of itself, he acknowledges that one possibility is a bifurcation between those who really are seeking unity and love, and a possible turning, even at that point, by others towards separation, division.
Good. And here's another one that down that line, kind of, from Robert McDonald. If we're speaking of hope, as we are, is it not appropriate to imagine an eschatological peace, not the protological myth, where we can find a creaturely kinship?
I don't think I understood the middle of that question.
Yeah. So, is it not appropriate to imagine an eschatological peace? What does that mean? Peace at the end of time? The end time peace, eschatological? Or not the protological myth where we can find a creaturely kinship.
Oh, I think
Do you get it?
where's Robert, are you here?
Yeah, he's up there.
Yeah, I can chime in.
I wonder if he can say just a little more. Could you say just a little more?
Yeah. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So this gets into my PhD research at CST, Dr. McDaniel. I'm working with Philip Clayton, as both
Oh.
Ernie and Dr. and Sister Kathy know.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking of, there's the eschatological piece of, say, Isaiah, the peaceable
Mhm.
kingdom, versus the protological myth of Genesis 1 and 2, where
Oh.
beings were created according to a certain pattern. And so I'm wondering, is there a sense in which we can, my dissertation is on ethical vegetarianism across multiple traditions, including Jainism and Shinto. And so I'm just curious if perhaps we can find hope in both Teilhard and White, or let me rephrase that. Is there a way in which we can find hope in both Teilhard and Whitehead, both of whom I've studied, to move toward what I would call what others actually have called a creaturely kinship? I think Elizabeth Johnson talks about this as well, where we can move away from the violent tactics we have toward, as a species and a society, toward creation in general, but also our fellow creatures, our fellow animals on Earth.
Let me respond, Robert. I think in Whitehead and in Teilhard, it seems to me that there can be good and desirable possibilities available to us that have not been available in the past. So just so there can be hopes available to us that were either not available or were not especially relevant in the past. So the idea of a peaceable kingdom, for example, where the lion lays down with the lamb, and let that symbolize some kind of creaturely kinship and some kind of peace that really has not been known in the history of life on Earth. That doesn't mean it's not still possible. It can still be possible and desirable. And then you could look at a tradition like Jainism, for example. as, in a way, glimpsing that possibility and embodying it in its commitment to vegetarianism. For example. So, and I see Teilhard as well as Whitehead both inviting us to recognize possibilities that are available to us that may not have been available in times past. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way it seems to me. I still have a hard time with the peaceable kingdom in taking it too literally, but a sense of creaturely kinship on the part of human beings for other creatures, I fully believe in. And by the way, I'm a vegetarian myself, so I believe in that as a viable possibility for humans, even though I don't think it's a possibility for the wolves or the lions. So there can be unique possibilities, species unique possibilities.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Thank you, Dr. McDaniel.
Mhm. So Ralph Martinez is sharing with us a quote from Seamus Heaney, the poet, the Irish poet, very appropriate on the day after St. Patrick's Day. And I think it'd be interesting to hear you respond to this or comment on it. Hope is not optimism, which expects things to turn out well, but something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for.
Yeah.
Yes, that's my comment too.
Yes.
I'm going to add to Ernie. Amen. Amen.
Yeah, maybe that's the point, is the working toward, that's what
Amen.
the drawing of Omega is toward the future. So good for Seamus Heaney. We all agree. Let's
My
see.
own evolutionary slogan is "You are always complete and you're never finished."
Um,
There's hope in that too.
Oh, Ernie, that's so Zen. Zen Christian. I call that Zen Christian. Always complete, here and now. There's the Zen part. Never finished. There's that eschatological Christian part.
Yeah, right. Wow. Let me see, here's another one maybe we can look at from Thomas Hastings to everyone. Experiences of loving presence and exercising loving of all things are what I think leads to growth in loving generally and brings us closer to Omega. So experiences of loving presence, exercising loving of all things, they're the things that bring us to Omega. Question mark. So that was a question. It was written as a sentence with a question mark. Again, good. Mhm.
You take it, Ernie.
Well, yes, answer to that one too. Exercising love in all situations, that's making eye contact with somebody who wasn't expecting it, a smile, a petting a dog, loving a plant, beholding a sky. Those are all love.
And I want to add to your examples there, forgiveness as a form of love that adds a kind of something to life that's unexpected sometimes, but really important. I think in the ministry of Jesus, loving your enemy and forgiving people 7 times, 70 times, that was a dimension of love that I think may not have been as emphasized in the Judaism that he inherited.
Mhm.
The notion of loving enemies is really very rare in the history of religion. Not among the Jains, Robert, but it's a rather unique thing. I took that question, by the way, as can our small acts of love or our random acts of kindness, or do they contribute to the emergence of Omega? And I want to say, yes, they do. Yes, they do. I think that they participate in add to whatever hopeful future is possible.
Mm.
In a process philosophy framework, the concrescence, where everything that's available to us in a given moment, whatever the us is, the actual occasion, whatever is available in a given moment, comes together in us and becomes something new that's available in the world then, and available to others as part of their own experience of concrescence. So I just say that to frame that, yes, every act of love is available as something that can come together in oneself or for somebody else if it's an act of love that you've offered.
Would you want to add, Ernie, would you want to add to that every act of wonder, every act of playfulness, every act of gratitude, every act of every sense of mystery? I mean, would there be kind of a palette of ways of being that add to Omega in different ways? I think of the playfulness of a child, for example. I'm the proud grandfather of 2 one-year-olds, and I'm watching them play and learn to laugh. And there's just something so beautiful about that. I think that contributes to Omega. I think it does.
Absolutely.
So to spread it out a bit, so love broadly defined, it's all love broadly defined. But if we meant love more narrowly, there's more than love. If we define it narrowly. Which I think goes back a little bit to this question of violence in the creativity of the universe. It's not exactly love narrowly defined. But there's something intense and vital
Teilhard
about
sentence I really like is Teilhard says, love is the free and imaginative outflowing of the spirit over all unexplored paths.
that sounds like creativity.
Yeah. Something that really bewilders me, I don't want to lead off into this direction, but I'm really bewildered by the level of viciousness I see around us today.
Yeah, no.
Don't understand it at all. Don't know what to do with that in evolutionary or
Gosh, I don't either. I think a biologist might tell you that viciousness maybe played an evolutionary role in some forms of evolving life. For the purpose of survival, you had to have a feeling of protection, and you had to battle. And so I think we've inherited tendencies toward aggression, no less than toward tenderness. The Jewish tradition talks about the human heart as kind of a mixed bag. It can go either way. It can go towards sin, and it can go toward love, and they're both there. And if you take one side as aggression and the other side as tenderness, let's say, we have capacities for both, and we have those capacities in part because we inherit them as part of our own evolutionary past. We're not born tabula rasa. We're born with already existing potentialities encoded within our genes, and that comes from the past. But how did it come that we now live in a culture where meanness is almost normative?
Yeah.
And tenderness considered weak? That's a very odd situation.
Let us pray. We don't want to end on hopelessness. Let's.
I think we need to live though. You see, you've converted me to Teilhard. I don't know if I'm an Orthodox Teilhardian, but I'm a process Teilhardian. And I think there's a pulling something in us that's about love, deep down, radical.
The resilience of the human spirit.
And I
that,
think
that exists now. I mean, that
yeah,
still
yeah.
exists among the meekness.
yeah,
And we'll see if it surfaces, I think
Yeah.
in the future. Yeah.
yeah,
Are you ready for another question?
yeah.
This one comes from Diane Baker, and she already asked a question, but her questions are good. Could it be that the universal unitive consciousness or God consciousness is making room for or trying to incorporate the newness of the moment and the everything of present moment affecting everything that came before? This sounds very Whiteheadian, I'm sorry. But I love it.
Can you repeat it? I thought it was a
I would
poem, and
love it.
I
Yeah.
was living in the poem, and now I realize it's a question. Okay.
Yes. Could it be that the universal unitive consciousness or God consciousness is making room for or trying to incorporate the newness of the moment and the everything of present moment affecting everything that came before it? So it's something about, well, go ahead. I'm not going to say because I think
Well, I want Ernie I'll say, I want to see what Ernie says, and then I'll follow up.
I was going to say,
smart.
I'm going to say what Kathy said. It is a very Whiteheadian or process way of.
Yeah, so at least I know that.
I say that's not fair at all. That's like saying, you take that one, Jay. No,
Yeah,
I'm giving it back to you. You take it, and then I'll follow up. Just do your best, Ernie.
Let me see if I can rehearse it in my mind.
And by the way, if this gives you any comfort, I think this will be our last question.
That's comforting. And there's a lot of words in the question. A lot of
Yes,
different
right.
newness, by implication, concrescence, to use a Whiteheadian term, how all these things that are new and already around us come into one in such a moment. And then that moment becomes available to others to incorporate into their experience. So that's all I can do with it, Jay, is just riff on it, not answer it like a question.
You did fine. And so, is it Jane that asked the question,
So
Jane?
Diane Baker.
Diane? Are you
Yeah,
here, Diane? Can I see Diane on the screen?
maybe she's left already. Some people have.
I'm here.
I see.
Oh, are you
Oh.
still here? Good.
Well,
Yes.
Diane, I'm gonna look you straight in the eyes, in terms of my screen. I think that at this moment, you are concressing, and that means you're gathering the many of your world into the unity of this one moment, this experience. And that's being expressed as you look back at me. And I'm concressing too. Every word I utter, every gesture I give is an act of gathering the many of the world I inherit and we inherit. And I'm giving it to you. And this is new. See, this moment never occurred before.
That's for sure.
This moment never occurred before. So this act of concrescence is brand new. And it always is, actually. But is there something in you and in me that beckons us to respond to one another in a spirit of love? And I think there is. And I would call that the call of Omega.
Mhm.
I would also call it the call of God. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
So that's how I interpret your question. And so with Ernie, I just want to say yes.
Good, wonderful. Well, all I have to say is this has been a wonderful discussion, and we've had these a couple times ahead of time, just to make sure we knew where we were going tonight. And this is just as exciting as those were, and it's so good to have these questions and ideas coming up too. And there's some wonderful comments in the chat too, saying how much they've enjoyed the evening and how meaningful it was. And it's a risk to come and have a conversation, right? It's easier to prepare a talk. So thank you very much for your input, both of you, and for your work too, and work in understanding Whitehead, understanding Teilhard, and trying to make it accessible to others. Or your reading, your study group. It's so wonderful that you're getting through the human phenomenon.
By the way, several folk over time have commented on the images that came from that Phenomenon of Man
Oh, yeah.
presentation. And one of the artists who created those is still among us, so I will certainly pass that kind of comment on to him. I agree, they're wonderful images, really evocative.
Mhm.
After you showed that, Ernie, I thought, who needs a conversation? They were all said in those images. It was really so beautiful.
Yeah, there's so much we could have another couple of thousand of these talk.
Love it.
Anyway,
I want to thank you all too. I want to thank the American Teilhard Association for including me and other people in the process community who have been here with us tonight. And it's night where I am. And a special thanks to Ernie, my companion and friend, who's inspired me to become a process Teilhardian. So,
I remember
welcome,
when I was
Jay.
when I was very first getting familiar with Whitehead, I had a conversation with you several years ago now, and was aspiring from that point on to hopefully get a dialogue going between Teilhard and Whitehead.
yeah.
Not just us doing it, it's really emerging. Several people are writing along these lines or talking along these lines these days. Good sign.
It is a good sign.
Let's keep it going.
Yes.
Definitely. And so again, thank you. And
Thank
I
you.
just want to share my screen now and do a few announcements. We always need to end with that. Let me see. I think this is the one. Okay. All right. There we go, I think. And so here we have let me start here with the website address and my email. If you're interested in joining us, we would love that. And we would also like to invite you to this event with Catherine Keller, another process theologian. We're getting into this with the Teilhard Association, which is exciting. And it's a weekend retreat at Dalesford Abbey. If you're able to come, if you can just come to the talk, it's on May 31st from noon to 2. But we had a wonderful retreat last year, and we had gathered about 50 people. And this year we're hoping for even more. You can come for the day or you can come for the weekend. And I know it's hard to get here, but some people are coming from California already. So we're looking forward to that. We have another talk, Green Seeds for a Green Generation. Some young people have gotten together to try to help us to understand the, what we need to do to be one with the environment. We have reading circles, Ernie, Paula, and Sam Guarnacha, they're here. Tonight, Andrew Del Rossi and myself. And then I have a couple retreats that I do on Teilhard, if you're welcome to come. We just put out the proceedings from a wonderful conference we had in New York and Poughkeepsie, celebrating Teilhard's Mass on the World, its 100th anniversary. And there's some essays in here from scholars all over the world, but also from but particularly, I should say, from the relatives of Teilhard who really know something about him personally. And it's really wonderful to hear from him. If you haven't watched this film, you should. It's really wonderful, 2-hour PBS film. You can go to our website and you click that picture and you're there. And I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And of course, we have social media that you can follow us, Facebook, Instagram, and of course, our website. So I want to thank you all very much for coming and for participating. The questions and all that you should make a copy of those, because there was a lot of conversation too. So within the chat. So we hope you come again and join us. All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks so much.